I'm here today in Santa Clarita, California at Six Flags Magic Mountain, and today we're going to take a quick walk through the park and reminisce and talk about some things that have changed since the 80s and 90s. Now, quick disclaimer, I actually never got to come to Six Flags in the 1980s. My first time coming here was in the early 90s. So I'll probably be focusing more on the 90s, but we'll definitely talk about some stuff that's changed since the 80s as well. I definitely came to Magic Mountain a lot in the 90s, and in the later 90s, I ended up working here for quite a few years, and then I ended up working here during Halloween time as a walk-around zombie, and I did that for about like 13 or 14 years. So we'll talk about all that. There's a lot to talk about, so let's head inside. So my first experience at Magic Mountain was in the early 90s when I was 13 years old. And I came here with my buddy Big Mike for his 13th birthday. His mom told him she was going to bring him to Magic Mountain and he could bring 2 friends with him. And I was one of the friends that he decided to bring. And I was really honored. I thought it was really cool that out of all the friends he could have brought, he decided to bring me. And I kind of ruined the day because I had never been to an amusement park like this. I had never been on a roller coaster. And I didn't want to ride anything. Everything that they wanted to go on, I said no, and we ended up doing a lot of sitting around, and he probably really regretted bringing me. Right here in the front of the park is where my dad would always drop off me and my friends, and then we would head over there to the ticket booth and wait in line, and every time without fail, security would come up and ask us to step out of line, because at that time in the 90s, we always had the punk fashion with blue hair and mohawks and patches on our clothes, so they would have us step out of line and they would start harassing us about the way we were dressed, asking if we were in a gang, asking about the color of our shoelaces. And one time they even brought us into this building, which is the sheriff's substation. And they brought us in here for like maybe 15 or 20 minutes and interrogated us before finally letting us go into the park. So yeah, I've got a lot of experience with Six Flags security. So as we approach the front gate turnstile, the first thing that comes to mind is Twickits. And if you don't know what Twickits are, I'll tell you. So basically, you would hand them your ticket to get in, and they would hand you a Twicket voucher, which was a piece of paper that I always remember having Elmer Fudd on it. And you were only supposed to get a Twicket voucher if you paid full price to get into the park. And since we usually used coupons to get in, we weren't supposed to get them, but they always gave them to us anyways. And once you were inside the park, you would head right over here to the Twicket redemption booth, which was right next to guest relations. You would pay a $1 service fee and they would give you a Twicket, and you had 7 days to return to the park. So basically you would pay $1 and you would get to go to the park twice. So we would usually use free coupons that my dad would get from work, and then we would pay $1, we would get a Twicket, and then my dad would pick us up and we'd be like, hey, we got a Twicket, you have to bring us back next weekend. And he was really excited about that, I'm sure. But yeah, we got to go twice, you know, basically for $1. Now this is the entrance plaza with the famous fountain, and that fountain and all these shops over here and the bandstand, none of that has changed. Pretty much everything here in the entrance plaza is the same, except for if you look over here, you can see Tatsu towering over Revolution, and that definitely was not like that in the 80s and 90s, so that's a bit different. And then just to the side of the entrance plaza, I think where this store is, or maybe just beside it, was the Warner Brothers Kids Club, and that was basically just a kids show that was here for many years. And then if we look just beyond that, you can't really see the area anymore because it's now blocked by a fence. I think they're about to do construction over there, but that's where Flashback used to be.
Magic Mountain has this new thrill ride called Flashback with 6 hairpin dives that send you totally topsy-turvy. So I call my best friend Mo and we drive up to where all the great rides are, like Viper, Cyclone, Roaring Rapids, and who is standing there but my total heartthrob Veronica. She says, why don't we ride Flashback together? So we get on and my heart starts racing. We both start screaming, and now I can't decide which is more thrilling, Veronica or the Flashback? And I'm left wondering, could I be in love with a roller coaster?
Flashback was originally called Z-Force when it was in another park, but then they moved it here to Six Flags and changed the name to Flashback because they already had a ride here called Z-Force, which we'll talk about a bit later in the video. So Flashback was not a very popular ride at all. I don't know anybody that enjoyed it. I really enjoyed riding it, but probably mostly because it never had a line. And like I said, that's because nobody liked riding it. And with this one, I can actually understand why. It really banged your head around. You always had a headache when you got off Flashback. If you come just outside the park, you can still see the buildings from Flashback, and that's all that remains of that ride, but it looks like those are probably going to be gone pretty soon too. And right across from where Flashback used to be, they have the Six Flags bus on display. Does everybody remember those commercials? I don't know if this is the actual bus that was used in the commercials or if it's just a replica. So my second experience at Six Flags happened shortly after my first experience, and my second experience was coming here with my dad, and it's a memory that I really cherish because I didn't get to do a lot of things like that with my dad. There's really only 2 memories that I have of just me and him doing father and son stuff together, and I remember that right when we got to the park, we were walking this way, and when we got to right about here, Jonathan Taylor Thomas from Home Improvement walked right by us. I mean, you can't get much more 90s than that. JTT at Six Flags. But yeah, he was walking right here with a couple of friends, and he walked by and I stared at him and he didn't even notice me. This used to be the Moose Burger Lodge, and this is where I ate with my friends when I came here for the very first time. And the Moose Burger Lodge was a lodge-themed restaurant, but I just noticed that they changed it to the Sports Bar. And right across from where Moose Burger Lodge was, used to be one of my favorite rides in the entire park. This used to be Log Jammer, and it wasn't anything too special, just your typical log ride, but it was one of my favorites, probably because it was the very first ride that I ever rode here at Magic Mountain. And when I came back with my dad, it was the very first ride we went on together. And then years later, when I got a job here, I remember I had to come to orientation, and the orientation ended a bit early, and I had about 10 or 15 minutes before my dad was going to pick me up. So I ran all the way from the backstage area to the front of the park just so I could go on Log Jammer. And I remember thinking how lucky I was. But unfortunately, Log Jammer was replaced by Full Throttle, because this entire area where the roller coaster track now is, this is where Log Jammer used to be. It used to go all along the hillside, and if you look really closely, you can still find some remnants of Log Jammer. But I just remember how sad I was when I found out they were getting rid of that ride. Straight ahead is the Golden Bear Theater, and I don't think they do too much there nowadays. During Fright Fest, that's where they have the Hypnotist. And there's been a lot of concerts here at Magic Mountain over the years. I just don't know how many of them took place at the Golden Bear, but some notable bands that have played here include Animotion, Oingo Boingo, Sparks, Menudo, Weird Al, and in the early 90s, TLC and Paperboy played here, and it resulted in a riot, and that was actually the end of concerts at Magic Mountain, at least for a while. So I had to back up because I just noticed that the giant tree is gone. Right here, there used to be a giant fake tree, and that was the entrance to Bugs Bunny World. I believe the tree was called General Sam, and it was such a huge part of this area. I can't believe it's gone. So I just looked it up, and apparently they removed the General Sam in 2014. So it's been gone for quite a while, and somehow I just didn't notice. Now this is Bugs Bunny World. This is the kiddie portion of Six Flags, and it's been renovated multiple times over the years. It looks nothing like it did in the 80s, and it doesn't even really look anything like it did in the 90s. And right on the edge of Bugs Bunny World, this is Snack Shack, and it's one of the few places that I worked at here in the late 90s. And when I worked here, all we sold was ices. I think they sell a few different things now, but at the time it was just ices. And I liked working at Snack Shack because it didn't get a lot of business, so I basically just sat there all day drawing. Right there at that counter, I would sit there all day drawing on receipt paper, and maybe like twice an hour, I would get a customer that would come and buy an icy, but other than that, I was just by myself drawing. And right over here, this is the restaurant I worked at. This is Wascos, and every restaurant in Magic Mountain has a few things that they're in charge of. Wascos has Snack Shack, we had the churro cart, and we had the pretzel stand. And the majority of the time that I worked here, I was in charge of the pretzel stand. Sometimes I worked at the other carts, and sometimes I worked here inside Wascos. I worked at the front counter as a cashier. I worked in the kitchen making burgers. I worked at the fryer. I did a little bit of everything. And for probably about the last year that I worked here, I was a manager. I got to be in charge of people and tell people what to do and make schedules and all that fun stuff. And man, nothing has changed in here except for those digital menus. But other than that, it looks exactly the same. That's the kitchen I used to work in. These are the counters I used to work at. And looking in here is bringing back so many memories. And then right next to Wascos, right over here, this was where my pretzel stand was. And I can't believe it's gone. Like I said, the majority of the time that I worked here, I was in charge of that pretzel stand. I did everything. I stocked the pretzels, I made the pretzels, I made the pretzel cheese, which was just powder and water. And I always either made it too runny or too thick. Either way, it was gross. And then just beside the pretzel stand was the wood sign shop. And it was really cool when that shop was there. Me and the guys that worked there, we would trade. I would give them pretzels and they would make wood signs for me. So that was fun. And then just on the other side of the pretzel stand used to be another ride that I really enjoyed. It's now the Roadrunner roller coaster, but this used to be Yosemite Sam's Sierra Falls. And again, it wasn't very popular, but I really liked it. It was a water slide that you could go on in your clothes because you sat on a little raft and you got a little wet, but you didn't get completely soaked. So you were able to go on this water slide in your normal clothes. And I thought it was really fun. I always went on it, but like I said, for some reason, it wasn't really popular. So down there was Yosemite Sam's Sierra Falls. Here was my pretzel cart. Here was the wood sign shop. And then this entire area over here was the Granny Grand Prix. And these were some cars that you would ride in that were on a track and went extremely slow. And they basically just went on a track around a petting zoo. And you could either ride in the cars or you could just go into the petting zoo without riding in the cars. And there were also some cages that had some bigger animals, like I think they had a hawk and a wolf and a few other animals. They eventually got rid of all the animals. The cars remained here for a while, but then they eventually got rid of the ride altogether because, again, it just wasn't a very popular one. And then directly across from where my pretzel stand was, this used to be one of those rides that just went in a circle. I think it was like bobsleds or something like that, but I stared at it all day long. So just down the hill is Wascos, and then right over here used to be the Wascos churro cart, which was run by my good buddy Hector, and sometimes I worked at it. Right behind that is Buccaneer, which can be seen in National Lampoon's Vacation. And directly across from Buccaneer used to be the sign for Pirates Cove, which was the name of this area. And behind that sign was the bathrooms that I directed people to about 10 times a day. Those also had a pirate theme. Right next to the bathrooms is Goliath. And somewhere right here in this area used to be Jolly Roger, which was another spinning ride. I believe it was pretty much just like a tilt-a-whirl. Straight ahead is Food Etc., which is a pretty popular restaurant because it's made up of a bunch of stations. Like there's an Italian food station, there's a Mexican food station, a sandwich station, you know, stuff like that. But directly behind Food Etc. is the Oasis, and that's the employee cafeteria. And that's where I would come multiple times a week and get my chicken strips and fries. And then once I was done, I would play Centipede. They still had a Centipede arcade game, and I would spend the rest of my break playing that every time I came to the Oasis. And so that door on the very end on the left, that's the entrance to the Oasis. And then just beyond that is the outdoor employee dining area. And this is the path that I would walk on every day to get into the park from the backstage area. That's first aid. That's where I had to go to get a tetanus shot when I cut myself on the churro cart. And here's an employee coming into work right now. This used to be the Magic Moments Theater, and they've had a lot of different shows here throughout the years. I'm not really sure what they use it for now. This used to be a restaurant called Colossus Sausage, and back in the day, if you were working on a Saturday, employees could get a free meal from any restaurant in the park, and there was a few restaurants that I like to get my meal from, and Colossus Sausage was definitely one of them. I remember those sausage sandwiches being really good. Looks like it's now called Twisted Witch. I like Colossus Sausage better, but that's just me. And down here at this dead end used to be one of the greatest wooden roller coasters of all time. This used to be Colossus. Now, like I already mentioned, Colossus was a world famous roller coaster. It can be seen in National Lampoon's Vacation, during the opening credits of Step by Step, and probably in lots of other TV shows and movies. And it was the very first real roller coaster that I ever rode. Colossus opened in 1978, and at the time it was the world's tallest roller coaster. But unfortunately, in 2014, they permanently closed Colossus and turned it into Twisted Colossus. They used a lot of the original structure from Colossus, but turned it into a hybrid roller coaster, part wood, part steel, and added some upside down sections. And I don't know, have you ridden both? Do you like it better? I personally have never been on Twisted Colossus and probably never will. So if I may very quickly interject, I would like to tell my Colossus story. So like I already mentioned, the very first time I came to Magic Mountain with my friends, I wasn't very much fun. I didn't want to go on anything. I was scared of roller coasters. And shortly after that, I came back with my dad and things weren't much different. I didn't want to go on anything. He kept trying to get me to go on rides and I kept saying no. I specifically remember him trying to get me to go on Revolution and I was like, it has a loop. No, I'm good. And he was like, well, why did we come here? You don't want to ride anything. So he's like, okay, let me show you this ride Colossus. And he took me over to Colossus and I stood there and I watched it for a minute and I was like, yeah, that looks really cool. Okay, let's go over here and check something out. And he had had enough and he was like, no, get in line. And I was, like, what? No, come on. And he's like, no, get in line. We're going on this ride. And he was dead serious. He was not taking it anymore. So we got in line and I was terrified. And I remember I was reading the signs that they had posted and trying to use those, like telling my dad, oh, look, it says, don't ride it if you have neck and back problems. And Dad, you have a bad back. And he was just looking straight ahead with an angry look on his face and he wasn't having it. So we finally got up to the ride. We got into the train and I was terrified, but I was like, okay, whatever. My dad's here with me. If he says it's fun, he says it's safe, it's gonna be good. And the train pulled out of the station and it started going up the hill and I was finally starting to feel excited. And then I looked over at my dad who was on my right side and I looked over at him and he was grabbing on to the bar and just looking straight down with his eyes closed. And I was like, Dad, what's going on? What's wrong? And I think he just said one word. He either said heights or high, but it was right then when I found out that my dad was extremely afraid of heights. I had not known that about him. I didn't know he had any fears. And, but he pushed it aside to take me on this roller coaster. And he was fine with going on any roller coaster once he got past that hill. But yeah, so we finally made it to the top and I will never forget the feeling of going over that hill and going down that first drop. Colossus had such an amazing first drop. It was such a great feeling. And I had the time of my life. When the train pulled back into the station, I was so happy and so excited. And I remember just telling my dad how great it was and asking him if we could do it again and just saying how much I loved that ride. And after that, I rode Colossus every single time I went to Six Flags, multiple times during every trip. It was hands down my favorite roller coaster. And later when I worked at the park, I couldn't even tell you how many times I rode Colossus, like countless times. And then during Fright Fest, they began running Colossus backwards, and that was amazing. I tried to do that as many times as I could when I worked at Fright Fest. So when I found out that they were going to be permanently closing Colossus, I was completely heartbroken because not only was it my favorite roller coaster, but also the very first roller coaster, like I said, real roller coaster that I ever rode, but also the very first real roller coaster I ever rode with my dad, and really the only real roller coaster I ever rode with my dad. Again, I think other than that, I probably rode Gold Rusher and Ninja with him, but I'm talking about like a real large roller coaster, and that was the only one that I got to ride with him, and he introduced me to it. And if it wasn't for him forcing me to go on it, I may have never done it. So I was really, really heartbroken and really sad that I never got to take my son on it. He was too little when they closed it. So that final month that it was open, I made sure to visit the park and ride it one last time. I hadn't really ridden roller coasters in general in quite a long time. They had started to not be as fun for me anymore. So it had been a while, but I told myself I had to ride it one last time. So I visited Six Flags and I took one more ride on Colossus, and I remember the entire time. I wrote it by myself. Like I said, my son was too young to go on it with me, so I wrote it by myself, and the entire time that I wrote it, I made sure to sit to the left, and I imagined that my dad was writing it with me one more time. And it was really awesome and really heartbreaking. And like I said, I'm really sad that not only will I never get to write it again, but I'll never be able to take my son on it. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and end this video. I'm going to make this a 2-part video because there is still so much for me to show you. So I'm gonna post part 2 pretty soon, probably in the next couple of weeks. So make sure you keep an eye out for that because like I said, there is still so much for me to show you, so much to talk about. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.